The purpose of what we're trying to do is to collect really rigid, well-structured data and then apply the statistical analysis called Bayesian analysis to that data and get a ever-adapting list of options that we can then pick from. The second piece of an AI system is not just diagnosis. It's trying to select the most high-value diagnostic test. You can't do this based upon 3 or 4 people. You've got to do it based on a larger number of people where the variance, the outliers don't matter.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of 2 hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of 2 hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of 2 Hygienists, an Endeavor Business Media podcast. This is episode number 358, and I'm your host, Andrew Johnston, and thank you so much for listening. Not sure if you guys all caught that, but I did change that beginning a little bit. And look, I know that most of you guys don't even care about this. You're here for listening to Dr. Clark, who's going to be on the show a little bit later on, but I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm changing up the intro a little bit to include the Endeavor Business Media part. So over the next several weeks, I'm going to be workshopping a couple of different ways of bringing that in. And so if you'll just let me know your favorite, or you don't care, or whatever you have to say about it, I would appreciate that. Andrew at atale2hygienist.com. And yeah, I look forward to maybe hearing from some of you. So in this episode, I'll tell you what, boy, did I have it wrong last week on the intro. I think last week I mentioned something about I know I said we hadn't recorded with Dr. Clark yet, but that when we did, it was going to be on orofacial pain. And while he does speak on that, we went and took like a completely different rabbit hole. And I absolutely loved it. So if you spent any amount of time reading news articles, then it's probably inevitable that you've seen many of those articles talk about AI or artificial intelligence, because advances to technology just keep on keeping on. And when we started talking to Dr. Clark about some of the work that he's been doing and some of the work that his team has been doing, we really leaned into the discussion about AI and how it can help you map out a route for diagnosing orofacial pain, among other uses. So I was completely fascinated by him and his work. I know you're going to love it as well. So I'm excited for you to listen to this one. And next week, we have his counterpart from the Herman Ostrow School of Dentistry of USC, Dr. Mariela Padilla. And she continues on the conversation about diagnosing facial pain. And she explains kind of our role as team members. I think you're going to love her too, because she's one of those doctors who is all about the patient. And it didn't really seem to matter who got credit or what your title was. That her message was, we all need to be responsible to care for the patients that are in our chairs. And so I really appreciate that about her. So she's going to give us the tools that we need to be able to help our patients, which is awesome. So as a personal note, a couple of weeks ago, we got 2 little puppies, Otis and Hudson. They are a breed called the black mouth cur, which I think is generally found in Southeast United States, maybe a little bit Northeast, but mostly Southeast. Also kind of down into Texas area as well. They are often used for hunting. They're also used on cattle ranches and things like that. They're just gorgeous pups. So if you're going to Google it, black mouth cur is the dog. And when Brittany found out we were getting these dogs, we had been talking about some sort of a mascot for the podcast for quite some time. And so maybe this will be our new mascot, some of these pups. They are just the cutest guys. They are brothers, and they're just so intelligent. I'm really impressed. I think they're only 9 weeks old right now, and I am just blown away by how fast they pick things up and how much they learn. So be sure to check out our social media, our Instagram, our Facebook, for updates on them. And if you have the time, while you're just dilly-dallying on the social medias and things like that, if you don't mind leaving us a rating and review of the podcast in your podcast app, it would mean a whole lot to us. It really does a lot of things for us to be able to be discovered by other people. So one last thing about the next several episodes. I asked Bethany Montoya. She is the editorial director for Through the Loops, which is a newsletter by Dentistry IQ. I asked her to help me co-host, and unfortunately, when I told her all of the things that we were going to be doing, it was just curveball after curveball after curveball. And it's really hard being a co-host when you don't really know the game plan and you're not really part of, like the regular hosting responsibilities. And so I'm really sorry about kind of just the way that the interviews went. It was just, different on so many levels. It was still really, really good, but just so different for her. But I really appreciate when she jumped in. I think she did a great job, and I was happy to have her on. So you'll hear her voice kind of interspersed over probably the next 4 or 5 episodes. And I know she's going to be doing a tip episode for us in the future. So make sure you look forward to that. Okay, thank you again for listening, and enjoy this episode with Dr. Glenn Clark.
A tale of two hygienists.
Hey friends, quick pause in the show to remind you about the CE offered for several of our episodes. All you have to do is click into the show notes and follow the link to the CE Zoom website. Answer a few of those questions about the episode correctly, and you'll be rewarded the appropriate amount of CEUs. This wouldn't be possible without a partnership with our friends at Tempstars. Tempstars is more than just a temp and a placement service. They are clinician-led and education-focused and strive to perfectly match individuals and dental offices. Learn more about Tempstars.com or go back and listen to some of their tip episodes. They are absolutely worth the listen. And now, back to the show. All right, everyone, welcome into the interview portion of the podcast. We're very excited to have Dr. Clark on, and we're going to cover some topics I don't think that we've ever covered on the podcast. Dr. Clark, we've had this podcast going since 2015, and this will be the first time I think that we discuss this. So thank you so much for making time this morning on a weekend to be with us.
Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So there were 2 topics that we kind of were discussing back and forth. One is AI for diagnosis and orofacial pain, and the other one is oromotor disorders. Now, for you, doctor, do you have a particular preference of which to talk about first or talk at all about?
No, I can do either one, and I can do both, okay, depending on the time.
And unfortunately, we have a short amount of time here, but I would love to talk about AI a lot, sure, because I feel like that it's new, it's fresh, it's maybe misunderstood a lot. So how are we using, or what are we looking for diagnosis in orofacial pain with AI?
Okay, obviously, true AI is not achievable right now. That's an independent thinking computer that generates questions and answers, and that's not going to happen. But a narrow AI, which is an algorithm-driven prediction, is possible. And so the purpose of trying to implement an algorithm like that is to try to predict what the patient is presenting with. Now, just this week, Google filed a patent for using electronic health records to predict future disease. Who's going to get a stroke? Who's going to have a heart attack? Who's going to develop diabetes? Who's going to lose their kidneys and go on dialysis? Those are the questions that they're trying to predict. Now, in orofacial pain, we're not quite so grandiose. We don't have the major devastating outcomes that they're working on. Mm-hmm. Our focus is more on diagnosis. Patient comes in and, it hurts here, and you ask them a set of questions. How long, how often, where is it located, what triggers it, what makes it better. And with that data, those features, and obviously examination data as well, those features can be looked at to find out if they are highly associated with any particular diagnosis. And maybe they're associated with 3 or 4 diagnoses. And then the question is, which one is it? And so with Bayesian analysis, which is a sort of a statistical methodology, been around for a long, long time, it allows you to predict with probability which one is the best fit. And so you get as you're collecting the data, you get a list that pops up. And you add more data, it might shift the order of the diagnoses that you're considering based upon the new data you add. And you can maybe make better choices. In orofacial pain, we have about 100 different diagnoses we deal with regularly. Some of the headache conditions, some of the neuropathic pain conditions, some of the jaw doesn't work right conditions, clicking, popping, locking. And some of them are obvious. You don't need an algorithm to predict them, but some of them are not. And if you're dealing with a patient who has maybe multiple problems, has diabetes out of control and is going through a crisis in their life with their kids or their spouse, or is decided to stop all of their antipsychotic medications, and it gets a bit complicated. So the purpose of what we're trying to do is to collect really rigid, well-structured data and then apply the statistical analysis called Bayesian analysis to that data and get a ever-adapting list of options that we can then pick from.
Doctor, let me ask this. So, this is all predicated upon the fact that we need those data points to be input correctly.
Yeah.
Now, are you gathering the data just you and your team, or is this is there a global effort to input the data correctly?
Yeah, that's the big question. Garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's always the problem. And the standard in most notes is narrative note. Patient attends to the clinic today with a complaint of XXX in this area, and it is highly active, and that's a narrative note.
Right.
The problem is it's unstructured, and you have to then apply something called natural language processing to that note to pick out the key words. And if you get enough keywords, then you can say these keywords occur often with this diagnosis. But narrative notes are remarkably inconsistent.
Amen.
And people say things backwards. Patient presents with no pain in the left side, and all it sees is no pain.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to do natural language processing of a narrative note. As a result, we decided to create a highly structured checkbox-based medical record system. Now, there's 5,000 features that you have if you actually go and count all the features you could have. And so you can't have a linear-based system. You can't go feature 1, feature 2, feature 3, check that one, feature 4, feature 5, features. You can't do that. You've got to have a branching system. So we designed our own medical note-taking system. It's a branching system that, is hybrid, because sometimes you have to write a note because nothing fits inside the checkboxes.
Right.
But it's a hybrid system, and it's highly structured. And as a result, the data output from that note is absolutely amenable to machine learning, which is what the Bayesian analysis is a form of.
Can we just go through maybe one or two steps of that? So
Sure.
What is the first question of the branching system?
Well, in orofacial pain, and we're doing the same thing for oral medicine too, which is probably more in the realm of the hygienists, because they're the ones that are doing most of the oral exams, seeing lesions and wondering what they are.
Yeah.
And so we're doing the same thing, but I'll talk about orofacial pain first.
Sure.
So we first set up, I think, 10 chief complaints. So is it a nerve disorder? Is it a myogenic muscle pain disorder? Is it a derangement of the jaw joint? Is it a motor disorder where the patient has involuntary muscle activity? Is it a sleep disorder where they're having obstructive events? All of these are conditions we see regularly. Is it an intraoral disease issue? Is it a structural issue where their face is crooked and they've got a crossbite and it's getting worse as time goes on? So we set up these chief complaints. And, it's pretty easy to say, yeah, this patient fits in this one.
Yeah.
Now, if you didn't click the other chief complaints, then those questions don't come up.
Okay.
But if you say, my patient's coming in and their jaw's clicking and their chin is off the side and their midline's off and they're 18 years old, I've got to ask them a set of questions. I've got to order a set of tests because this could be a hypertrophic condyle. It could be an osteochondroma. It could be a bunch of different things. So then you branch off into the structural abnormalities system. And then later on, you branch off into the diagnostic workup system, based upon if the patient already has an MRI and a CT, you don't need those things. And so again, we designed the branch so that the number of checkboxes you actually have to click for the individual patient is probably in the range of 40, maybe 60 if a complex patient occurs. And it takes about 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then the data is there. And quite good, actually.
Well, I'm glad that they're not going to get some carpal tunnel from clicking all 5,000 checkboxes.
No, we designed it for a low click burden.
I like it.
This all sounds so fascinating because I work in a sleep and TMJ practice. And so we see so many patients that come to us with orofacial pain. And, it's such a complex, multifaceted issue that a patient can have. And sometimes we're lucky if we take an X-ray image and we can see a lesion or we see decay, then it's an easy answer. But for so many of these patients, it is to a certain degree guesswork that we're trying these different treatment methods to see if we can get the patient out of pain. And it's trial and error. And for some of those patients, we do find a resolution there. And then for a good number of those patients, they just go on year after year experiencing the same pain. And we just don't know what to tell them. So I think that having technology like this to be able to eliminate some of that guesswork and to at least give you an idea of a direction that you could be taking treatment-wise would be so valuable.
Well, that's the rationale on why we're doing what we're doing, of course. Mm-hmm. And thank you for talking about it. The second piece of an AI system is not just diagnosis. It's trying to select the most high-value diagnostic test. An example, you're like me, about 70, and you faint. Now, what is that? Are you having a stroke? Are you having a cardiac insufficiency to your brain? Are you having atrial fib? And you go to the emergency room and they run a whole bunch of tests, CTs, MRIs, blood values, et cetera, et cetera. And so this one group decided to look at that and say, okay, which of these tests have a high value and are predictive of a serious problem? And which one is just a patient who didn't eat their lunch and, low glycemia and fainted because they stood up too fast. And so the analysis that's being done in high, quality places is to look at the value of a test, not only just whether it's associated with a diagnosis outcome, but also its cost. Now, we're not going to get there until we have, 5,000 patients with outcomes. We can get the initial data and we can make predictions about diagnoses because we can make a decision on what diagnosis they have as an expert. And then we can associate the features that are associated with that, the phenotype essentially of that diagnosis. But the outcome requires long-term data. And once we have finished our system and we have it in place, and we do have it in place now, but it's to answer your question, it's only in our clinic right now. But once we've proven it and it's tested and we call it a sanity test, then we can make it available to other people. But that's not our agenda. Our agenda is the diagnosis and writing the predictive algorithms for future disease, writing the predictive algorithms high value or low value diagnostic tests, and low value and high value treatments that you render and medications that you prescribe. So that's the long-term goal. We hope to achieve that.
And I mean, I'm sure that, there's a lot of altruistic value of what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, but I could also see several special interest groups and different groups that would find value in this for exactly what you're saying. If I am, the big no word, the insurance guy, and I'm trying to not pay out for all of these tests that are being run, I would find a lot of value in this. My question, doctor, though, is, this is going to help, big picture humanity, right? We got that. But are we looking at trying to educate the clinician with AI supported outcomes, or is this so that I can go on my Google Monster and try and find my own diagnosis?
Patients don't do self-examination to any great degree that is accurate. So at this point, it is not only the subjective data that we collect, but the physical examination and imaging and serology and histology that we collect. Those will give us a better confidence level. Now, there are certainly some conditions like a clicking jaw joint where, it's all basically subjective. And if you had a symptom checker online, you could go in and say, I'm a 16-year-old kid whose jaw's locking in the morning and my jaw clicks and I chew gum 4 hours a day. We can probably guess what the heck that is pretty easy.
Sure.
But there's many conditions, especially the multiple comorbid problems where a patient has 3 or 4 problems that you can't do with a symptom checker.
Yeah. We have, I guess, I don't want to say the early versions of something like this, but with our caries diagnostics, our perio diagnostics, it's this, here are the symptoms, here's the recommended treatment, I guess. There is this one software that we use, and we don't need to say the name of it, but we used it in our clinic. We had 50 some odd offices, and it was to help us get calibrated on diagnostics, first of all, calling things the right things, right? Not backwards order, not frontwards order, but it was the same thing that you're talking about, doctor, where we had one input had cascades of options based on that input. We select that one, and it goes through what we need to do. And then ultimately at the end, there's included in the treatment options, but there's also some therapeutic remedies and things like that we could also do, not necessarily prescribed, but recommends to the patient. So is that the end goal is we're going to be able to quickly figure out all the problems with every single person?
Yeah, precision medicine.
Exactly.
The problem with the system you just described is most of the choices of what to do next and what this means, that's expert opinion. Now, many, many, many times the expert opinion is right on target, but many times it's not. And so I don't particularly like expert opinion decision trees. I would prefer a database-driven decision tree. And that's what we're essentially talking about. By having high quality, highly structured data, you will build the decision tree based upon statistical analysis. Now, you don't choose to go down this path, that's fine. But at least it'll be driven by actual data as opposed to, I think it's this, and I'm the expert, so listen to me.
I guess that for you and your team, like, how do you calibrate, or are there calibration exercises, or are the data points that objective every single time? Because I feel like there has to be some sort of subjectivity, and your eyes only work a certain way, your feel is a certain way. Sure.
Some of the data that we collect, like mouth opening, that's fairly objective. I mean, you take a ruler and you measure.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could be off a couple millimeters because you put it on the wrong tooth, or you didn't tell the patient to open wide enough, or something like that. But it's fairly objective. And with palpation findings, we do calibrate our examiners to apply a certain level of pressure. Some people are good at it and some people are lousy at it. but we do attempt to calibrate everybody with the chief complaint and history of present illness, largely that comes from the patient. Where is this pain? What point to that location? Okay, tell me its frequency if it's episodic. Is it once a minute, once a week, once a year? If you have the right language and the patient understands that language, you can get fairly consistent. If someone else were to interview the same patient, they'd get the same result. Now, the patient can change their mind and tell the next person something different, and that happens too. But that's why you can't do this based upon 3 or 4 people. You've got to do it based on a larger number of people where the variance, the outliers don't matter.
I love that. So, doctor, let me ask this then, timeline-wise. We have thousands of patients that still need to have their data points input into the system. Where are we looking at as a realistic expectation of when we could have this system given to another group?
At this point, we're still tweaking it. Like we just sat down and looked at the issue of when a patient has, for oral medicine now, 2 different lesions. They have a papilloma on the side of their tongue, and they have a papule in another area that's white. And our system didn't have the opportunity to describe 2 different lesions. It really was designed for 1 lesion, location, border, size, color, texture, all of that. So we had to redesign it. And now we made a branch. So is it a white lesion? Is it a white and red lesion? Is it a nodule? Is it an exophytic growth? Is it an ulcerative eroded condition? Is it a blister? So we now have these categories, and you go into the features of the lesion and describe it carefully, with a set of checks, essentially. And now we can have 2. And so we're still tweaking it, and we're not sharing it with people yet because it's not ready yet.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
But eventually, it's an app. We built an app, and it's online, and I could share it in a heartbeat when I'm ready.
I love it. So, doctor, I think I have a lot of other questions about a lot of different things, but I think what I would like to do is maybe use
switch topics.
I want to maybe actually use it as a teaser, because you do also lecture on this. So if someone was interested in this, oh my gosh, this is the most fascinating thing ever. Are there bigger, longer discussions that are being had about it that one could access?
The American Academy of Oral Medicine is holding its annual meeting in May 2023. And there's going to be a 3-speaker presentation. I'm one of the speakers on artificial intelligence in oral medicine, orofacial pain. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were to record that and make it available at a fee, I guess. I don't know. I'm not involved in that. I'm doing it for free, so I don't want to know. But that's one place where if you were truly interested in Atlanta, Georgia, you could attend, or you could just sign up for the virtual attendance. And I bet you that's available. The person who is driving our algorithm creation process is Dr. Gerald Loeb, Loeb. And Jerry is a professor of engineering. He's the director of medical device development. He's also a physician trained at Johns Hopkins and a friend of mine. And we're working together on this. He's published his paper on medical diagnosis of using algorithms. And he's given several YouTube videos. If you put in Gerald with a G, Loeb, you can find the YouTube videos, and they're hour-long, really intense videos
I love it.
that you may or may not appreciate. Data scientists will appreciate it, but the practicing clinician may find it over their head. But that's where I'd go.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, that's great information. So listeners, we're going to put all this information in the show notes, at least probably 1 or 2 links for our Dr. Loeb to watch those YouTube videos. And doctor, I think you'd actually be really surprised if you're listening to a dental hygiene podcast. What kind of special nerd are you, though? I mean, really? So we might actually get a few more views on his videos.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think, I want to have you back, doctor, at some point. We didn't even talk about the oral motor disorders that we were going to talk about, but maybe for another show, we can do that if you're up for it.
Sure. I'm presenting at the American Academy of Orofacial Pain. I'm flying from Atlanta to Orlando the next day and talking about oral dyskinesia, oral dystonias, and extrapyramidal reaction, because there is a stimulant epidemic now, and it's affecting the jaw and how much clenching people are doing. So I'm going to be presenting on that at the meeting in Orlando.
Well, that's
May
Orlando's my
7th.
May 7th. Orlando's my backyard. I'm in Tampa, so I might have to come over and see you, take some copious amounts of notes so I can actually sound intelligent as I interview you for that next one. That was all a foreign language that you just said to me. I didn't understand hardly a word of that. So doctor, if they wanted to reach out to you directly or send an email your way, is there any particular way that you would like listeners to contact you? Or not contact you either. I mean, that's an option too.
I have a reputation for being hard to contact. It's not because I don't care.
It's not a bad reputation to have, doctor.
but it makes it hard to get anything done if you constantly are monitoring your social media and responding to inquiries. So serious inquiries, maybe.
Let's do this for you, doctor. If you guys have serious inquiries, send it to me. Yeah. I will vet it first. And if it's good enough, doctor, I'll send it actually through Tor, Leonard, who's hooked all this up. And then it'll maybe find its way to you.
Yeah.
That we have a couple of layers of buffer in between there.
We have quite a bit of blogs and content on our website that people can read about that is very valuable. The Ostrow on, that's the name of the dental school after the guy who donated, Ostrow, OSTROON.usc.edu. There's a lot of material there.
Oh, that's good. We'll put that in the show notes as well. All right, doctor, thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. All right,
bye-bye.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.